and welcome back to my channel. And it's been a while since I've actually addressed you guys like this, not with my face on camera. And it's actually really fun for me to do this because it's the first time in a while that I have done a tutorial. And today's tutorial is going to be on what is dodge and burn, and I'm going to go through what it is and then go through a quick tutorial of how to do it. So I've had a lot of questions recently in regards to beauty photography, especially on how to dodge and burn or what retouching techniques I use for my images. Now I use a couple of different techniques. I would say dodge and burn is the one that I use most these days. I don't always use frequency separation, although I do still use it on certain occasions. And the reason I don't use frequency separation, particularly for beauty photography like this, and like I said, it doesn't go for every situation, sometimes I do use it, but the reason that I don't use it all the time is because I do find that it actually does take a bit of the texture away, even though it's usually split into two layers, one with a texture and one with more of the blemish colouring side of things. It still does remove a portion of the texture when you're working on those layers. So I do find that dodge and burn is the most versatile way, and I feel like you have the most control over this retouching technique with your images, particularly with close-up imagery like this photo. Any close-up images with beauty photography do have a different approach in how you have to edit them, and this goes for color grading as well and retouching makeup, which I will be covering in a couple of videos in future. But I do want to start with dodge and burn today. I want to let you guys know what it is, and there are several ways to dodge and burn, so I don't want to confuse you guys too much, but I am going to just go through one method of dodge and burn today, and it's the method that I use pretty much on a daily basis. This particular dodge and burn method is basically by using a couple of curves layers and then inverting them and then working on them as like masks. And I also have a background copy layer which I edit on as well to remove any blemishes or little bumps or anything like that. So what is dodge and burn? So dodge and burn is a method of using light and dark in an image to help even out a skin tone or any parts of the image that might need to be smoothed over or evened out. So it's basically like using the dodge and burn tools that are already built into Photoshop, but the method I'm going to show you guys of how to do this is a less destructive way, and you do have more power over the toning of the image too. So the method that I like to use is by using curves layers, as I said before. So all we do to create those layers is going down to our adjustment panel just down the bottom here, and then clicking on the adjustment layer button, and then going up to curves. So the first curves layer that we're going to make, we're going to click right in the middle of the line, just there, in the middle of that, and then bring it up. The image is getting quite bright, and that's what we want for the dodging layer. So we're going to kind of leave it at about there, and then we're going to hold down Control and I, or Command I if you're on a Mac. It has blacked out this box here. So this means that we can now paint onto it with a white brush, and then it will show through the light curves layer that we've just created. So I'm going to make one more curves layer, and this one is going to be the burning layer. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to click in the middle of the line here, and then we're going to drag it down this time. It's getting quite dark, so we'll leave it at about there, and then hold down Control I again to invert it. So I'm just going to rename these layers so I don't confuse you guys. So this is the dodge layer, and this is the burn layer. I'm also going to click on the background layer here and drag that into the new layer button. This is going to duplicate the background layer, and now I have a background copy layer. So this is actually the layer that I like to start on, and in this layer I will usually get rid of any bumps in the image and on the skin tone, and any lines or makeup marks or anything that's really stand out in terms of it might be harder to get rid of with dodging and burning. So I'm going to zoom right in to the image, and then I'm going to go over to our healing tools over here. So these healing tools are quite destructive on the background layer, so that's why I've created a background copy layer, and if I need to delete the layer or go back to the original image at any time, it's an easy fix. So over here where the healing tools are, I'm going to click on Spot Healing Brush Tool. You can use some of the other tools here, they kind of all have the same effect, although I do like to use the Spot Healing Brush as it's quite quick and it's quite easy, and it's usually for what I need it for. I'm getting rid of the little spots, the little bumps on the skin tone. You can have the brush settings set to content aware, and I've just got a hard brush at 80 pixels, and I'm just going to start going over some of these little bumps on the skin tone and getting rid of those just to kind of smooth things out a little bit more. Siobhan though has incredible skin, so we're really going to not do too much to the skin. I truly believe in less is more sometimes, and I am going to go over in my next video about some of the mistakes that people use with dodge and burn, because I think they're quite easy to make, and I quite often will make some of those mistakes, and it's just good to point them out so you kind of know what to look out for. And one of those mistakes is definitely going to be focused around knowing when to stop with editing skin, because I feel like that's a really big issue for a lot of retouchers and a lot of photographers, and even myself a lot of the time. So I will be going over that in one of my next videos. But for now, we're just going to be getting rid of these little lines here, and just any little, I think there's a little bit of fallout on her face from the makeup, so I'm just going to make sure that is all cleared up. Any little hairs, actually this is a really good tool as well for removing hair strands. That's another reason why I use the Spot Healing Brush tool, because you can either just kind of hold it down and get rid of a spot, or you can drag it and get rid of a line or a hair, so it is quite a versatile tool. And I like to do this first because it just gives me a better base to work with dodging and burning, and I sort of know what texture I'm looking at in the photograph. So I'm just going to continue doing this, and I'm actually going to show you guys just getting rid of this hair right here. And it's okay if it makes kind of some lines like that. We can actually fix that with dodging and burning too, so don't worry too much about that for now. Because healing brush tools can unfortunately have a bad reputation for smudging too many hard-edged surfaces together, or creating a bit of blur where it's really not needed. Unfortunately, they can be problematic at times. You just need to be a little bit more aware of when that tends to happen. So we're just getting rid of those last few little bumps. I'm actually not going to go over makeup and retouching makeup in this video too much. I will have other videos, I think, dedicated to that, because I think that's just worthy of its own video. It can be quite a complicated process. I'm gonna get rid of this stray eyelash hair though, and just some of those little lines. And as you can see, there's just a few little black marks there, so we'll just get rid of those now. Okay, I think we've pretty much got most of the little bumps that I was looking at before. Anything that we haven't got, we can go back and remove later, but most of that is gone now. So now we're going to move on to the dodge layer. And usually for my brush settings for dodging, I like to adjust them a certain way. So first off, we're going to go over to the brush tool over here on our panel. And it's good, it's already set to a very soft brush, which is what we want. We want the hardness at about 0. And then I'm going to move the size of it to quite small, probably for this image. I'd say probably about 30 pixels is good. It's always going to depend on the type of image that you have, if it's quite a close-up shot, or if it's quite a further away shot, so it really just depends. But the flow I'm also going to set to 1%. I'm going to turn airbrushing off. And then just over here at the brush settings, I'm just going to make sure that transfer is checked and the opacity is set to pen pressure and also the flow is set to pen pressure as well. We want it to be really nice and soft. So that's pretty much the brush settings that I have them at. There's nothing really too fancy going on there. It's just a small soft brush at 1% flow and with the transfer box checked. So then I'm going to move in, and seeing all of these little fine lines just here, I'm going to start to paint them in. Oh, and the other thing that I forgot to mention is that you do need to have white selected to use on this curves layer for the dodge and burn layers. This is to ensure that everything does paint through and actually shows up on the mask, which is just here. If you have it set to black, nothing will show up. So just make sure to set your brushes to white, and just going to just fill in all of these little parts here. And this is basically just like mimicking light and how the light is placed on a skin tone. And unfortunately, even when you're looking at a model in real life, when you're about to take a photo of her, the light can look perfect, her skin can look perfect, she can have the greatest skin in the world, but sometimes the light will show up texture on certain people's skin tones more than others. And this is kind of why this technique is quite good, because it can really help soften the texture, but it still keeps that skin looking real and realistic, not looking like a doll, provided that you don't go too far with it. So if you can see what I'm doing here, sometimes it's a little bit hard to see in real time, but I'm going to click on the eye just over here on the dodge layer, and you can see the small improvement that that's made just in her under eye there. It is evening out a little bit more. So we're going to continue doing this, and I might speed up certain parts of this just so you guys don't have to sit here and watch me for like 10 hours editing. But I do want to give you guys a really good understanding of how this method works and why it is so good for beauty photography in particular. This is one of the main ways that a lot of beauty photographers do like to edit their images, and it does give them a lot of control on how the image looks. Now, I would say I do think it's important not to zoom in too far, because the closer you zoom in, the harder it is to see the image overall. And you want to have it zoomed into a point where you can see, if the image was blown up quite large, you can make sure that you've got all those little bumps and it's quite even. But if you get in too close, like if I was to zoom in right to here, right into the pores, you're not going to be able to see how it looks as a whole, and this is when people can really go too far with the editing, because you're filling in every little line, and in reality you don't need to fill in every little line. It's just the shadowed kind of areas and just going over it to help brighten it a bit. So I think the thing that people forget sometimes when they're retouching skin is that you want to keep that texture. You don't want to get rid of it all. Obviously, Siobhan has quite good skin, and I'm not really retouching someone that has problems with their skin. So that can be a determining factor in how much work you have to do. But at the same time, you do want to make sure that you are keeping that texture intact, so later on it doesn't look like it's poor quality or like you've gone too far with the retouching and smoothed it out too much. So I do have it on 1% flow at the moment, but you can up it, I would say up to maybe around 4–6% if you want to have a little bit more speediness with your retouching. It just tends to apply the light a little bit quicker onto the skin tone. What you also want to try to do is see these shadowed areas here. I would generally not go in with the dodge tool on these shadowed areas. I would usually just like to stick to the highlighted areas or the lighter areas of the skin tone with this particular curves layer with the dodge tool. because if you start going into this area here, it's going to remove the contrast that the image has on the skin tone, and you're going to be lightening the overall skin tone, and you don't really want that to happen. So what I would recommend doing is switching, when you get to these shadowed areas here, is switching over to the burn layer, and you would basically have your settings the same. I mean, like apart from the flow, just depending on what kind of flow that you'd want with the brush, but same settings, white, coloring, and then just start to sort of fill in some of those spots there with the burn tool. So you're softening it that way and not using the dodge tool just for everything. I think that's kind of another problem that tends to arise, and I used to do that a lot when I was starting out with dodge and burn, but it does actually tend to take away the texture as well in the shadowed areas, so we don't really want that to happen. So I'm just going to fill in some of those spots. Now I'm going to do a quick update for you guys and show you what the burn tool has done. So it's just filled in those light patches there, and then the dodge tool has filled in a lot of that cheek. So what I will say as well is, if you are expecting this to be quite quick, a quite quick method of retouching, I would say unfortunately you are quite mistaken. And if you are looking for a quicker way to retouch, I would definitely recommend frequency separation. You won't be sitting here for hours on end with frequency separation as a retouching tool. However, if you want a better finish, especially for those closer up images, dodge and burn is generally going to be a much more time consuming method, but it will give you, in the end, I think, a better result. I would generally use frequency separation as maybe a combination technique on images where there might be a model with quite bad skin, and I would start to use that just to soften the texture even more and help with the blemishes and clearing of the blemishes. When I used to do wedding photography, I would use that technique a lot for the main images in a wedding, the more important shots. I do find that it's definitely a more quicker method of retouching, and I think that's probably why people love it so much. And it is quite a powerful tool. I would say though, I think for beauty photography, there are not too many beauty photographers or retouchers that I know that do use frequency separation as a very up close retouching method. Usually it is dodge and burn, but honestly it does depend on the person, and it depends on the photo that you're retouching, because there are still times where I use frequency separation for certain images, as I said before. And really, like I said too, it just really depends on the person that you are and what you like to use, because there is no right or wrong way to do this. If you are getting a fantastic result using frequency separation, then honestly keep doing what you're doing, because something's got to be working. I personally find that I'm better with dodge and burn these days, and that's really why I just think that it's a better method for me personally. I do think with a lot of the work that I do being so close up, it does really help when I'm using dodge and burn a lot of the time. So these images, when it comes to beauty retouching using dodge and burn, it really can vary in terms of how long it takes me to edit a single photo. And you guys will probably be sitting there in horror when I actually tell you how long it can take me sometimes, but depending on the image, it can take anywhere up to around 3 hours on average. I would say it more or less takes me between 1.5 hours to 2 hours, but it definitely can take that long. And especially if I'm doing work for a client and they are looking at blowing up the image to be quite large, something like this, I would need to make sure that I am putting a lot of work into it and making sure that it is kind of perfected in that sense. So as I said, in any of these little shadowed areas, just go over it with the burn tool instead of using dodge too much. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit for you guys just to see our progress here. So I'm going to take a snapshot just on this side and go back to our original image, and you can see what we've kind of done to help clear up the skin tone so far. But as you can see with the skin tone, the texture is still intact, and that is definitely what we want. So I'm going to continue doing parts of this image, and I will keep updating you guys as I go along. So for a lot of these fine lines, I usually tend to have quite a small brush, and I'll try and fill them in with Dodge and Burn. If it's not working, sometimes it just doesn't really work with Dodge and Burn, I would try to use the healing tools to get rid of the fine lines. And usually I try and do that first, because it can be hard using the background layer to retouch once you have got those Dodge and Burn layers over the top. You only want to use the dodge tool on the shadowed areas if there are parts, like I said, that are quite dark and are significantly darker than the shadowed areas, just to lighten them up a little bit, because that will help even out the skin tone. I'm also trying not to dodge too many of the freckles out, because I do want to keep them in the shot. Of course, I want to make sure Siobhan's skin tone looks as natural as possible. So now's the part where I'm pretty much done. All I really want to do is kind of zoom out a little bit further, and if you can kind of see, you can see a little bit of patchiness just in areas where I've kind of missed and might need to use a bigger brush just to kind of mesh it a little bit more together and mesh the skin tone a bit more together. So I'm going to just make my brush a little bit bigger and start going in on those places where it sort of looks like it might need a little bit more darkness or a little bit more lightness, just to bring it together a little bit more and not have it too patchy. Now you don't want to overdo this too much, because it will start to look very soft and glowy, and that's not really what we want. We just want to make it look that little bit more even. Okay, so in looking at this image overall, I do feel like I have gone a little bit far. And the reason I say this is because I just feel like the skin is looking that little bit too smooth at the moment, and I want the natural texture to show through very well. So there's two ways that I can kind of remove some of the dodging and burning that I've done. And that is by selecting black as the color for the brush, and then going to either layer and starting to paint black onto the image instead of white, which I was doing before. So as I said before, white makes the curves layers show through, whereas black will actually not make it show through, it'll mask it. So usually that's a method that I would use to remove some of the dodging and burning and just kind of soften it in spots if I was going to do that. Or I could also just see how it looks with the opacity. If I go to the dodge layer, because it's probably the layer that I've used most, you can go to the opacity over here and just bring it down a little bit. So I'll actually show you before and after of this. So I'll take a snapshot before and then move the opacity down to maybe, let's go to say 64, and I'll take another snapshot So that's all I've done with the opacity tool, is kind of like let that show through a little bit more with the texture. So I personally think just reducing it a little bit looks a little bit better. It just shows that cut of the highlight a little bit more, the edge of it, which makes it look a little bit more sharper. And that's actually another thing that I like to do with the dodge tool. And you can still do this at 64%, but usually I would go to the brush tool again, still keeping it as a white coloring, and then upping the hardness to maybe 70%, 75%. Then I'll usually up the flow a little bit, maybe to 8%. And I'm going to, this time, just make the highlights stand out a little bit more. So I'm only going to go over the highlights of the image. And we're just kind of going to do quick strokes over the highlights, just to make them stand out even more. It's important not to go too overboard with this, because it can get out of hand pretty quickly. So that's pretty much like all I would do. I'd usually lighten up the eyes as well, just a little bit, and I'd probably just fill in this a little bit more. Just at the corner there. Just to make that just a little bit softer. And that is pretty much how I would dodge and burn skin. So as you can see, we've still got a lot of the texture intact in the image. I'm going to give you guys a before and after. There's just a few more things that I want to quickly cover. Once again, I'm just going to state that I'm not going to go over the eyebrows, makeup, eyelashes in this particular tutorial, because I'm going to go over that in another video. And just with any tiny little hairs as well, like this that you might get, it's really just a quick removal of using the spot healing brush tool on the background layer, background copy layer I should say, and just kind of like quickly going over them like that. I don't tend to go over all of them because I think sometimes it can make it look a little bit fake. It's just really some of the more standout ones, because everything helps retain that little bit of texture, so I don't really want to remove all of it. Okay, and there is pretty much what I would do in terms of dodging and burning. And there's so much more to skin retouching that I'm going to cover, like color grading as well, and that's a really big part of it in terms of color grading skin tones, because they can be very hard to get right, especially if the lighting is a bit off or something like that happens on a shoot. It can be a little bit difficult, but I do want to go over that in one of my next tutorials. I hope you guys have a really good understanding of what dodge and burn is now, and one of the methods that you can use is this method. This is the method that I like to use a lot, and I personally think it's a really good way for a lot of very close-up shots. This is my favorite way to use it, and I think that it's definitely going to give you a lot of control over your images. So I'm going to go to give you guys a before and after. So the before of this photo, this is the before, and now this is the after. So you can see that it really has removed a lot of the blemishes, a lot of the unevenness in the skin tone. And as I said, there's nothing wrong with bringing those opacity levels down a little bit just to help you. And I could really sit here all day and retouch this image, but at the end of the day, I want it to look that little bit more natural. So I will generally fill in quite a bit with using dodge and burn, and then I will tend to bring it down at the end and see what it looks like. So as I said, guys, I hope you have a really good understanding of what dodge and burn is now. I hope this tutorial was useful for you and that you enjoyed it. Please let me know what else you want to see on my channel, because I am looking for tutorial requests at the moment, particularly when it comes to retouching for beauty, because I do have a series that is ongoing at the moment specifically for that, and I want to help you guys in terms of learning retouching, and especially with closer up images, because that was one thing I found really hard to research when I was starting out, and there wasn't a lot of information on it that was freely available. So I hope this helped you guys. Let me know what you want to see, and if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed already, please do, because I will be putting out more tutorials soon. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!